Alright. My goodness, all my stuff. When we talk about sectioning, sectioning is very similar to orthographic views, okay, which is basically what we've been doing for the last 4 weeks or so. It's very similar. You're still looking at the view from different sides. But the difference between sectioning and multi-view is that you're going to basically determine what line of view or what line of sight of the object you want to look at. Okay? And the other thing is, when it comes to sectioning, there's a line type that you used a lot in orthographic that you will not see in section views. Not typical. And that is the hidden line. Because when you go to cut a section, basically what we are doing is, think of it like this. Let's say if I took this monitor right here and I broke it in half, okay? And then I turned the monitor to you so you can see what it looks like inside of this computer or inside this monitor. That's creating a section. You're cutting something to show what it looks like from the inside, okay? Why will we use this? For instance, there's been a lot of these where you've drawn these multi-view objects has had a bunch of circles in it. Some of them have been, one of the ones you just had to do, that's due today, it should have had a countersunk hole, okay? That kind of stuff you probably had to show what? Hidden lines, right? In a section, you would cut through so that you can show this thing exactly how it sits. You won't show it by hidden lines. And you'll see that. Let's get started. Because what we're going to talk about, we can sit here and talk about sectioning, but there's different types of sectioning. And depending on which type you show will depend on which type you have to draw. For instance, look at the top of page 172. They show a cantaloupe. What they did was they cut that cantaloupe completely in half so that you can see exactly what the inside looks like. Okay? Without cutting it in half, would you be able to tell that it has that seated center, which is a little recessed than the rest of the cantaloupe? No, you'd have never known that. So you cutting the section shows that this middle has some type of recess in it. What would that kind of section be called? That is a full section. And basically what it did, if you look up here at the screen, here's your cantaloupe. And what they did was draw their cutting plane like this. Okay, that cantaloupe, the way it's cut, would be drawing your cutting plane exactly like that. Now you've done this before if you were in Principles of K. We did that hub drawing, where we drew a cutting plane down the middle of the hub and then drew a section of it. This is the same way. Now let's get to talking about the different parts of the sectioning. Well, the first thing you always have to do when it comes to a section is you have to draw, of course, the cutting plane line. You can see the cutting plane line right here. Right? What do you notice about the cutting plane line? Okay, I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit here, but we'll kind of go through it all. The cutting plane line is a phantom line. Okay? Do you remember what we talked about here about the center lines, the measurements on it? Go to page 178 in your book. Your little dashes here. Let's remove it. Your dashes are 1/8 of an inch. And your missing areas right here would be 1/16. Your arrowheads are going to be quarter-inch long. And they're going to be 1/8 inch thick. Quarter-inch long by 1/8 inch thick. Now, there is a key to the arrowheads. The arrowheads, the way they're pointing is your line of sight. Okay? This means this is the direction that I am looking. Exactly what paragraph it is. On page 178 at the bottom, what that's showing you, whichever way your arrowhead is pointing, your view has to go on the opposite side. So what does that mean? If my arrowhead is pointing to the left, you have to draw your image on the right side. Okay? So if your arrowhead's pointing to the left, then you have to draw an image on the right side. Now what if I had it going this way? Which way would my image go?
To the bottom.
I would draw an image at the bottom. Okay? So whichever way the arrowheads are pointing, you draw the image the opposite way. So if it's pointing to the top, you draw it to the bottom. If it's pointing to the left, you draw it to the right. Okay? Alright, now let's go back to page 173. Let's talk about the full section cut a little bit more. How does this work? When you cut through an object, it still works just like a multi-view object. What I mean by that, let's say I have a big old circle up here. Let's say I have a hole here and a hole here, right? And let's say I'm going to cut a section right down the middle of this object. Okay? So we got a section. I got a drawing up here on the board. I got a section cut through it. So I'm going to draw my object over here to the right. And what I mean by it's similar to multi-view projection is you still project off of the object that you have drawn to create your section view. So when I want to know my height, I just project from over here from the top, project from the bottom. Once you do your centering formula, of course, this will tell you about where this line needs to go. And something will tell you a thickness of this, or you'll have another view of it. So you'll get the thickness from the other view, and then you'll come in and draw it out. Alright, so put your holes in. We said typically if it does not tell us a distance, how far it goes down, then what does it typically do? All the way through, right? So in this case, we're going to figure this is all the way through. So I'm going to project over. Okay? So I have all the holes projected over. I have everything about this object projected over. The only difference is, because we're cutting through this object, we don't have hidden lines to show our holes now. We actually have visible lines. And the reason that is, now this is where you got to listen very carefully. What if I had a hole here and here? Huh? No. Because when you cut in this section, generally your section, when you cut one, is strictly to show what that cutting plane is touching. That is why we draw sections. We're strictly trying to show exactly where we're cutting at. Now, does it happen all the time? No. Because you'll understand when you get into like structural drafting and architectural and all this kind of stuff, you may still have hidden lines when it comes to cutting sections and large details and all that. Because when you get into that type of drawing, there's a lot more detail to it, there's a lot more information to it. So sometimes you do have to show hidden lines just to show basically where this is lining up with something right behind it. And that may be your reasoning behind it. But in this case, I'm just trying to show, hey, this is where the holes go through. It goes all the way through the object. It does not stop anywhere. I'm trying to basically show the height of the object. So that's basically what they're trying to show you at the top of page 173, the middle of page 173, and the bottom of page 173. This is called a full section, so remember that. And I promise you, most likely you will not. How do I know that? Because in your last semester here, you got to take the CPAS test. The CPAS covers everything in fundamentals, principles, intermediate, advanced CAD, architectural drafting that all of you will take in the fall, that plan on continuing on. covers all this information. This is, for some reason, one thing that our students cannot remember is the types of sections. Believe it or not. So when I do a review before they take their CPAS, this is one of the big things I cover. And I will tell you, your group right here, if you continue on through the summer and take the couple classes you need, that means most of you in here that are continuing on will graduate in May. So you'll be entering in with another group. You're basically going to blend in with another group that we got going. Y'all have an uphill climb to beat the group of students we just had take the CPAS.
I mean, I got somewhere in college.
Yeah.
Wait and see, sometimes after.
They just scored pretty good as a group. It's the highest average as a group we've ever had on the CPAS.
I may have to start all over again next spring semester and catch up to what I need to do.
Yeah. Well, thank God you're an intermediate, because as long as you have intermediate, you can basically jump into classes out of sequence.
I got to get on that.
But a lot of this information we covered on it, so it is kind of important. You still have to know how to create sectioning when you get into these other classes. So this is a very important topic. Now, back on okay, we said these are our cutting plane lines. Now, what did you notice about 173 that I do not have on my section right there? It's a type of hatch, right? Go to page 179. In AutoCAD, we call that hatch. In fundamentals, we call it section lines. Okay? So in fundamentals, we call it section lines. What is a section line showing? A section line shows you basically where the solid parts of the object are. That's basically what it's saying. Basically what it's saying is, and what I'm talking about is a solid part. If your object, or when your cutting plane line comes through, and it actually hits a line, for example, everybody look up here. My cutting plane line comes through and it hits a line. That means that is a change of direction, right? So that means that has to be some type of start, either in a solid or some type of solid start. So you come over here, you have it. When you come through this, and until you hit another line, that all has to be solid. Okay? So when you have a solid material, you come in and put your section lines. Now, once I get here and I come across here, is that solid? No, that is a hole, so that isn't a empty space. Okay? So I won't put any section lines here. Now, I continue on through. You see all that needs to be solid because it's not touching any lines. Gets to the next hole, and then you finish out your section. Okay. So basically, when you see that section right here, I automatically know, without having any information, without even looking at the plan view, I automatically know by looking at this section, I have two holes in this object. Because this tells me all of this is solid, and there's nothing in this space. So that means that has to be some type of hole. Hole or a recess. Okay, a hole or a recess of some type. Now, sectioning lines do have to have a certain criteria you got to use to go by. One of them is the parallel dimension between your section lines have to be 1/8 of an inch. That is the parallel section, has to be 1/8 of an inch. The angle of these lines need to be at 45 degrees. And when you draw these, you need to have a 0.3 millimeter pencil. It need to be a 0.3 millimeter. They need to be light. 0.3 millimeter. Now look at the bottom of page 179, the last two sets of images down there. The only time that your angle will not be at a 45-degree angle is if you see down there it says B, direction of section lines. You see that object actually is set, part of the object is set at a 45 degrees, right? So in this case, what we would do was change the angle from 45 degrees to something like 30 degrees. Okay? Just because you have that 45-degree angle, because if you look at the image right next to the one under, in the middle that says no, it's kind of hard almost to read that because everything's at a 45-degree line. So it kind of makes it look like everything's part of the, all the lines are part of the object. Now, look at the very bottom. When you have hatch or section lines that you're going to have on a drawing, the best thing is to keep dimensions out of the hatch. The reason being is because they get lost. Okay? Look all the way to the very right at the bottom of page 179. That dimension is kind of lost, isn't it? You can't, and believe me, it happens. I've seen this done in drawings out in the field, and you totally overlook this dimension. Because when your eye sees hatch, generally it just glides on past. So that can get lost. Why do they show the middle one is okay? The lines are not going over the text. If those of you who are in principles, you remember your final exam, you did have a dimension that was in your hatch, but you had to do the background mask on the dimension to take out the hatch from the text. So in some cases you do have to put one in there, so if you do, make sure you don't have lines going over the text. Alright, turn back to page 177. This is a very important page because it can really help you out determining what lines should be there and what lines should not. Rules for lines. They say show edges and contours which are not visible behind the cutting plane. Otherwise, a section will appear to be made up of disconnected and unrelated parts. What they're talking about. To the right of page 177, look down and you see option C. What does it look like on that option if they don't show all lines or edges, even if it doesn't connect to or doesn't touch the cutting plane line? Looks like it's 4 individual parts, doesn't it? What they're talking about there is the same thing I just did up here on the board. If you notice, this actually looks like a part, doesn't it? Up here on the board. If I go in and did not show these edges, even though did my line touch that edge over there? No. But if I didn't show them, what does it look like? This looks like we got 3 individual parts. So you still have to show that edge, that visible line back here, even though you're not touching it. So that's what they're talking about when you have to show visible edges. Okay? Then it says, omit hidden lines in section views. Section views are used to show interior detail without a confusion of hidden lines. So add them only if necessary to understand the part. Yet again, like that, what they're talking about there is on example D. Do we really need those hidden lines in there? No. Because then it kind of crowds up your section. It's kind of a little confusing. The only time we show hidden lines, like I said, is if we're in like architectural, structural, something like that, and we have something that's coming into this, behind it, that we need to show where it lines up. Okay? That's the only time hidden lines would usually be on a drawing. It's something beyond, but we have to show where it lines up with each other. A section area is always completely bounded by a visible line, never by a hidden line, because in every case, the cut surfaces will be closest surface in the section view, and therefore their boundary lines will be visible. They're talking about option E. You see how they have the outlines as hidden lines? Any outline or anything that, I'll tell you this, anything a section line, that 45-degree line touches, should be a visible line. Okay? Should be a visible line. Any lines that you draw on a section view have to be visible. A visible line can never cross a section area in a view of a single part. What are they talking about? Look at the very bottom of G. Do you notice how the visible line goes across the hatch? You should never have a visible line going across your hatch. Ever. Okay? The only time that you have that, and not generally, the only time you would have a situation like that is if you have 2 parts, 2 individual pieces stacked on top of each other, then you would have to show a visible line going all the way across the middle because that's showing that this is 2 pieces. But when you have one solid piece, like this image I have up on the board drawing, or the image in the book, and that's one solid piece, you should never have any kind of visible lines going across the hatch line. And option F there, all they're trying to tell you why that's wrong is all your hatch lines should be going the same direction. Your hatch lines should not alter direction. The only time your hatch lines will alter in direction, and I'll show you up here what I'm talking about. Let's say I have this part, and then I have a part, individual piece that's stacking on top of this. What we do a lot of times is draw the hatch lines this way on this one, but then turn around and do the hatch lines this way to show that these are 2 separate pieces. But when it is one solid piece, then all your hatch lines will have to go the way as I show them right here. Okay? So that's kind of what 177 is talking about. Do you remember what we talked about when we first started with lines? We talked about the line of precedence. Sectioning has a line of precedence also. Visible lines are number 1. Cutting plane lines are number 2, and center lines are number 3. Okay? So, visible lines, cutting lines, and then center lines. Now, after saying that, I personally don't like putting a tangent line all the way through an object if it's the exact center and I'm showing a center mark. So there's another option that you can do. At the bottom of page 176, notice they have a center line going all the way across this object. But then at the very end, they make a gap past the center lines, and then they draw the edges of their cutting plane line with the arrowhead. That is another way that you can do that without having to affect your center line. So that is okay to do that. Okay? Now, if you go to page 180, it shows you different types of section lines or different types of hatches, patterns. The one we're using right now, with just a single 45-degree line spaced an 1/8 inch apart, this is basically called ANSI. Okay? What it is a standard, it's a standard hatch that can mean any type of material. Okay? It's not a specialized actual hatch. It can mean any type of material you want to use it for. But if you go look at the rest of them, you can see they all start to actually label something like number 2. If it's double line space like that, that represents steel. Another one that we use a lot, if you look over number 12, that's a representation of concrete. You will see that a lot when you get into architectural. Another one is number 16, sand. You'll see that a lot when you get into architectural. At the bottom of 15, or number 15 down there, well, actually, 15 modified, if I modify 15 a little bit, that would be a representation of earth. And then, of course, number 18, as you can tell, looks like a wood grain. It's a wood material. So you see, once you start getting out of technical drawings, where we draw strictly, basically metal or plastic style objects, you start having to get into a lot more hatch patterns to represent different materials. All right. So we have a full section right there. Like I said, we're going to learn quite a few different sections today. But what I want to do is show you, because these two I'm fixing to show, or this next one I'm fixing to show you, is confused the most with a full section. Okay? They get confused the most. So what I'm going to do is draw a similar object like I have over there. What's the first thing you notice about this object? What's one thing that just catches your eye? It's symmetrical. What I mean by that, this hole is the same distance from here. Basically, if I cut this thing straight down the middle either way, it's the same, right? So it's a symmetrical object. So in these type situations, when you have a symmetrical object, you can cut what we call a half section. Okay, a half section. If you look from the half midway point down on page 181, they show you again the cantaloupe. Just to show you what it would look like if you actually, in reality, took and cut a half section. You notice what they did? They started from one edge, went only halfway through the object, and then jotted out the side. And removed that piece of the object. So in this case, and see, this is where people get confused, because when they look at this, they think quarter. This is a quarter. In theory, you're right. Okay? In theory, you are right. But don't think of it like the piece you're taking out. Think of how far the cutting plane line goes through. So when you think of sections, that's the way you need to think of it. Don't look at the actual object itself. Look at the length of the cutting plane line. If the cutting plane line goes all the way through the object in a straight path, that is a full section. Now, if it goes like this, that is a half section. Now, what do you notice about that cutting plane line compared to the full? It only goes halfway through, but there's only one arrowhead compared to two on the full. The reason behind that is this says the direction you're looking at. This line, you can't show that same direction, can you? Because if you did that, you'd have to do an arrow like this and point that way. We're not looking like that. What we're actually looking at would be basically what you're showing is we're looking at this point back. Okay, that point back. You know what? Let me change this up a little bit. Because you're not going to be able to see what I'm trying to show you. Let's say there's a third hole right here. Okay. Now, notice that this line right here has to jot out the opposite direction than what your arrowhead is pointing. Okay? It can't come out this way. It has to jot out the opposite way that you're pointing. Because what this is showing is, hey, this piece right here is what we're taking out. And we're trying to look at this piece right here. Okay? So which direction do I draw my image? My section. Arrowhead is pointing to the right. So in this case, I project over. Project over. Bad image, but it works. Same thing, project over with your hole. Project over with your hole. Project over your center line. Still have to show center lines. Now I'm going to hatch this. That would be the complete section for this half section. Now, compare those two sections. Totally different, right? Notice that I drew this top part just like I did this one up here. Now, if this one had a hole right here, you'd be able to see it. But when you do a half section, like I said, you can only project the lines that your cutting plane line touches. So I projected this one over, but it doesn't touch this one, does it? So you can't project this one over. So when I look at this object and I see it's a half section, basically what I can tell, knowing there's a center line right here, is whatever's happening here is also happening over here. Whatever's happening from the distance from here is the same as right here. So that's basically what a half section is showing you. Hey, this is a symmetrical object. I'm only drawing half the section because I ain't wasting the time to draw the other half. And believe me, back when everything was done on the board, this was saving grace for time. Okay? Because if you had to do a big old drawing and hatch all this stuff all the way down, it takes a lot of time. So this actually was very good to develop when it was board drawing. Today, do we typically do this with CAD? No. Why? Because it's so much easier now just to draw half of it in here. Okay? It's just too easy. So in today's time, we do show full sections just about on everything. Okay? So this is handy though when it comes in the fundamental or technical drawing. So just know the difference between these two. Full, because the cutting plane goes all the way through. Half, because the cutting plane only goes halfway. Okay? You have to know the difference between those two.
I got a question. It's not about that. It's the arrowheads. On one you got them filled in, on one you got them open.
I just didn't take the time to fill it in.
Oh, okay. So they all have to be filled in?
Yeah.
Okay. I just,
Good question. Okay? Yeah, generally you're going to show closed arrowheads. Now, I've been waiting to hear if anybody were going to ask me, what is your cutting plane line? What pencil should you be using?
shouldn't it be like 0.3 or 0.5?
0.7. It needs to be the darkest one. It needs to be as dark as your border. Why will we do that? Because when you have a cutting plane line going through the object, you don't want it mistaken for one of the part of the object. You want it thicker than the object. You want it to stand out that, hey, this is different than the rest of the object. Just so it doesn't get lost. How do you feel about this so far? Feel like it'd be pretty easy? Like I said, it's almost just like drawing a multi-view drawing, except you don't have to find all the hidden parts to it. You draw strictly only what your cutting plane line shows. Okay? I'm going to end it here today. We're not finished with sectioning. We will lecture again next week. But I like to generally give you an idea, let you at least draw one first, get a general idea of what we're doing before, because there's about 5 more different types of sections we're going to go over. Every one of them is on your final exam. So next week, what we're going to do, we're going to come back in, you're going to turn your drawing in, we're going to finish lecturing on sectioning, then you'll have we're going to finish lecturing on sectioning, and we're going to lecture on dimensioning. Okay? Because dimensioning is going to be on your final exam too. You have, let's see, the final week is April 29th. April 29th through May 3rd is the finals week. Your final is May 29th. That's what it's due. Next week,
April 29th?
April 29th.
This is May. I was like, wait a
Yeah,
minute.
April 29th. Next week, at the end of class, which will be, you'll set on a timer. Next week, by the time or midway through the class when we're lecturing, your final exam will open up. It is a take-home final. You will print it out. You will hand it in to me by April 29th. April 29th is the last day you can hand it in to me. Let me tell you very carefully, and people still did it last semester even though I said this. When you staple that paper or that exam, if it is out of order, I will not grade your page that is out of order. The reason being is because this thing, when you print it out, is about 18 or more pages long, or about 10 pages. It's 147 questions. I've never had 100 on it, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you. I've had A's. I've had tons of A's, but I've never had 100. Now, this take-home exam, like I said, it has to be in order because when I lay every person in here turns in and I got them stacked up, I grade the first page, put it to the side. Grade the next one, grade the first page, put it to the side. Do that through the whole stack, and I move on to the second page. So if your second page is the 10th page in the thing, I'm not turning all the way to the 10th page in my paper trying to find it. No.
Do you want to print on separate pages too, not front and back?
You can do front and back.
Oh, okay.
People do that too.
It'll work
I don't
with that.
care about that. That's the way my thing's done.
Okay.
It's front and back.
As long as it's in order.
It better be in order. Last semester, like I think there's like 10 or 12, maybe even more multiple choice on one page. Person turns to there, their page is out of order, I put a big X on it, 12 questions wrong. I warn you, I tell you. You're high school or you're college people. You're not high schoolers, you're not elementary school. Okay? When I give you a handout that's in order, you should be able to turn that handout in order. That's the way I look at it.
We have one Friday on chapter 4.
This Friday, you have a quiz on multi-view projection. So the study guide's already online. Next Friday, you will have another quiz on sections and dimensioning. I think it's 6 and 9 or 6 and 6.
Something like that. I think it's 6 and 9.
So the next 2 Fridays, you will have quizzes. You will have draw and do Monday. You will have a draw and do the following Monday. Yeah. And then, of course, your final exam will be due the following. Now, the final exam, I take it anytime from the 20s, and I'll put all this online. Anytime starting from the 24th through the 29th, I take the final exam. Because, listen very carefully. If your final exam is not placed in my hand, and sign the paper I will have for you to sign to show that you turned in your final exam, it don't get graded. Okay? If it's in my door, you run off and don't sign the final exam showing that you were there for it, because what I'm trying to say is that Monday the 29th, it won't be a set class. We won't say, okay, at 9 o'clock Monday morning on the 29th, we will meet in here and you'll turn in your final. It'll basically be set up to where, hey, you can come here anytime Monday from 8 o'clock till 6 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock till 4 o'clock at night to turn it in. Or you can turn it in the week before if you finish it. Okay? But you have to sign the paper showing you were present. I still have to turn in a sign-in sheet for that. So if you don't sign it, and your exam's in my door, I just take it from the door, throw it in the garbage, and give you a zero. And you wasted your time.
And this is gonna open again?
This will open up next week in the middle of class, so y'all won't be able to see it until after we basically lecture. So y'all ain't looking at it and printing it and all that one time later. Okay? So when you turn in your final, where do you turn it into?
In your hand?
In my hand. It actually, believe it or not, somebody just didn't want to listen last semester, turned it in my door, put a zero on it, threw it in the garbage, or actually kept it, put a zero on it and say did not follow instructions. It caused him to fail. All because he was too lazy to come put it in my hand. That's my point. It's not hard to do.
What's he gonna do if he's out in the field and somebody says, well, you have to put this in my hand, and he just drops it on the desk and it gets lost?
That's right. That's my point.
Like,
Because if it gets put in my door, or something like that, it can easily get lost. If it gets put in my hand, I know right then to go do something with it. Put it in the place I got everything put. But when it gets placed here, on this desk, somebody stacks something on top of it that's garbage, and I just swipe the garbage off into the thing, it gets lost. So if you put it in my hand, it's on me. If you don't put it on my hand, it's on you. Okay? The questions come from the book, and let me tell you, some of them are not easy to find. Okay? Some of them are not. But I know they're all there because I've had students make 97s, 98s, and they don't miss the same question. So they got it from somewhere. The books or the notes. The notes takes precedence over the book. Okay? So if I said your arrowhead needs to be this on my notes, if the book tells you this, who are you going to go by? You better go by me. Okay? Because some of the old drafting standards are a little outdated. So you better go by what I told you. Alright? And when I mean it's in the book, it could be something right out of underneath a picture. It may not even be in the paragraph. It is a take-home find. It's not supposed to be easy.
you know, they do it my take-home test and trade.
Yeah. So,
I got maybe 2 of them done.
but like I said, I have never, since 2007, since I started giving this exam, I've never had 100. So somebody prove me wrong. Alright? Any questions?
What's our assignment?
Alright. If there ain't no set questions about the exam or about what we went over today, your assignment will be. I had to pay Mark to pull my paper out. Page 467. Page 467. You're gonna say you gotta draw the front view and draw a section all the way from the top down through the middle. That's a late April Fool's. Go back to page 205.
What kind of food you doing today? You didn't want to put a ball in my picture?
That's a late April Fool's.
Yeah, cause you were here.
I wasn't here April Fool's, so I wanted to get you on.
Page?
205. I should have seen all y'all's faces. Y'all's faces started getting beet red and panic started coming over. Alright, 205, exercise 6.4. This will be a metric drawing. What you'll do is you're going to draw a top view. We'll draw a top view, and then you're going to draw a section. Cut. You see that gap on the top left-hand part of this object, a little bitty 4 millimeter gap? Yeah, where that Woodruff key type thing is. Your section is going to start from there, go all the way across the object down that center line until you get to that arrowhead that says 22 millimeters in parentheses. You see that one? 22 in parentheses. Yeah. Once you get there, you're going to basically draw your cutting plane line going across there, and you're going to be looking towards, your arrowhead's going to point towards the 88. So basically, this is your cutting plane line. You're going to go across, and then you're going to have an arrowhead pointing that way. Okay? So you're basically going the length of it down that center line, which you're going to cut. So you're going to have a top view, the section view, and they got to be centered, of course. But there is one thing that I forgot to show you that you need to add. And where this comes into play, actually, you know what? For right now, don't worry about it. We'll go over that next week. I'll add that into next week. Because you'll see where it comes into play next week on the drawing guide. Alright? So for right now, we'll just forget about what I said. So draw the top view, section view, for the top. Alright, now listen. I'm not going to tell you how these should be placed. From the lecture, you have to figure out how it needs to be placed on your sheet. I'm talking about top view, section view. Where does the section view go? You have to figure that part out. Alright? Any questions? Yeah, you're going to have a view and a section view. You have to have your cutting plane line with your arrows and all that on there too. No dimensions, none of that. Just your views, your top view, your section view, and your cutting plane line. Your section view will have to have section lines like you see here. All these, you have to have that on your section view. It's got to be hatched. It's got to be proper, 1/8 inch spacing. 45-degree angle. Any questions on it? Basically, you're only drawing 2 views, is all you're doing. Okay? Don't forget to turn in that assignment that was due today, that last orthographic view assignment. Oh, pre-registration.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to get to it today, for the simple fact, we're having trouble getting y'all's permits. We went on the system this morning to print out y'all's permits, and without the permits, you can't register.
Well, we were told, I was told by Tricon, that pre-registration was starting at 18.
They say, I thought they said today.
Yeah.
They made it change, but I was told the 18th on tree construction.
It was supposed to, I thought, start today. Well, the permits were supposed to be sent out today or something. But we have yet, me or Ms. McGee can't get in and get y'all's permits. And without that, we can't get your alternate PIN. Without your alternate PIN, you can't go on web services and register. Okay? Another little thing, because I want the recording to catch this in case anybody watches it. The summer, if you under VRAP or any kind of VA money, they do not pay for May semester. So if you take the class, it's going to be on you
For the summer.
for the summer, which I think is going to be what, $350, $400. If you don't take it in the summer, then you're going to have a pretty full spring next spring. So that's all up to you. Now, we did add blueprint reading to the summer. It is going to be strictly online. So those of you that are on VA money, the way we got it figured out is y'all have to have at least, I think it was 9 or 12 hours.
You have to
It's
have,
not during the summer.
it's 9, you
Nine.
have to have phone, you have to have
Only during the
phone.
summer is it not.
Yeah, 9 hours, because that's when this,
You still get a portion of your money even if you want to take it. Yeah. You ain't gonna have the whole thing. You have to like 75%.
Yeah. Well, I have to do the whole thing, because that's what I did on the one I did after I had completion.
well, the 9 hours, 6 of them be covered by 2 of the drafting classes. And if you're getting the associate's degree, then of course your other, we can throw you a couple academic that you're going to need to help fill in the rest.
I don't know, but that's why I'm taking trees, because I've already got all my core classes.
Are you on Bell Grant?
I'm on B-Rap.
Be right.
Yeah. I mean, I can take something else, it's like, I've already had English Comp 1, I can take Comp 2 or something like that.
The only problem is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, VRAP only covers classes, courses that goes towards the degree, right?
That's the thing that you have to, they only pay what.
Yeah.
They
They
don't
don't,
pay for the English Comp or anything like that.
yes, English Cotton just strictly because it is
Because I know I.
part of
need
your
that.
degree.
Yeah.
But English Cotton 2 is not part of our curriculum.
Yeah, I had to find something.
Maybe
else.
you're gonna trick you. Let you switch your degree a couple times too. If you want to take some classes to get your associates, if they won't cover it, you can switch your degree for like a semester, then switch it back.
I'll figure it
You
out,
only do it
because
like
like I
2
said, I
hours.
wanna get pre-registered, but I may not be able to come to summer anyway, because I'm still waiting to hear back to see if I'm gonna have this other test done, to see if they can even do that training. Because the one disc that's really screwed up, that's really causing all my problems, is down one that's inside your hip bones. So that's the big major surgery, and that's gonna put me out for 6 months.
Well, I wanted to say that.
Fix it.
The reason I wanted to say that is 'cause I had a couple of questions last week about it, and I told y'all I could find out. So they said the May master will not be counted, but I'm leaving that strictly up to you.
You may not have the money to do it, but
What I'm saying is this semester gonna end too, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but what they do is because the semester ends May 3rd, this class doesn't start till May 6th.
So we should still get paid, but that will get paid on the first day.
yeah, if you're on the VRAP with the GI Bill, it's
Yeah,
gonna pay you.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking, asking you, don't y'all get a last paycheck at the
Well, see
end?
what happens.
You still get paid on the first and every month.
Yeah.
You get
already-
paid after 1 month. It's
Yeah,
like
so-
you went to school for February, you don't get paid until the beginning of March.
For February, they're a month
Get paid
behind.
March first, a month.
48
In
days.
January, I had to live off my sister's student loans until I got my first check. Matter of fact, she paid for all my stuff to actually start classes out of her student loans. She's full-time student.
So it was May, like, so your basically tuition's already been paid.
My tuition's paid for this semester, and then when we get paid in May, if we want to pay for classes in June, in the summer, we just pay it out of what we get paid in May. That's what I'm gonna do, if I can
Yeah,
get
for that May payment, I'm gonna have to pay for where I can pay the late.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, so that will work for you all.
But it won't give us any
You
money.
just won't have any spending cash.
We don't have any money to live on.
You guys got any doing that, great.
Y'all didn't get shorted this month, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't get shorted this month. I got shorted $200.
I did
They
too.
gave me 2 small payments and 1 big one.
I got a lump
It
sum
took me like-
payment, but it was almost $100 short.
So mine was a couple of short. That's all I wanted. It was under $800. My mom had to get $700. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna figure out. I take off the disability for one day, but I get almost $1,600.